You're very fortunate. But I'm very excited today to be able to come out and talk to you a little bit about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is the legacy of the Walt Disney family. And so I would like to invite someone to join me here on stage. It's so great to be here with him, and he's a dear friend, and it's Disney royalty. So he's the son of Roy Edward Disney and the grandson of our company co-founder, Roy O. Disney. So please join me in welcoming Roy Edward Disney.
Thank you, D23. Thank you, Mike and Arda. Thank you, everyone. And secondly, I want to give a shout out to Becky, because she has a collection of knickknacks in her house that goes back over 150 years. And without archives, thank God to Dave Smith who started it. Hollywood is a very disposable industry. You can throw things away. But the fact is that we create culture, art, personal importance to everyone in this room and certainly everyone globally. And instead of throwing it away, Dave Smith figured it's better to remember the past, learn from the past, learn about going forward, doing the right things. And Becky is the one person responsible for all of that. So thank you.
Thank you. It's easy to take care of the things that you love, and we go back to Sir Dave Smith. Absolutely, he was the founder of the archives, but he was hired to do so by your great grandfather.
Out of UCLA.
It's really out of UCLA. He's a librarian here. So grandfather had the vision to start the archives in 1970, and so we're all very grateful for that. Speaking of the Disney family legacy, we're going to talk a little bit here and start at the very beginning. This is the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, and it was Roy Oliver Disney who was a crucial part of the founding of the company. And I wanted to see, what do you see as his behind-the-scenes genius in starting and moving along to grand visions?
So let's go back in time before this shot. By the way, my grandfather was the shorter one there. Thank you, Grandma. The fact was that Elias Disney, Walt's father, Roy's father, was a loving man but an extraordinarily tough man. And the reality was that in 1916, 17, 18, all four of the boys, Ray, Herb, Roy, and Walt, basically ran everything. And Walt went out on his own. Of course, he had a very unformed but obsessive vision in his head, and he didn't know how to accomplish it. So he went out first in Kansas City, and then partly through the persuasion of Roy, Hollywood, where the action was. But struck out repeatedly. He did things like standing on the side of the set, hoping to be cast as an extra, if you can imagine that. He tried carpentry, he tried loading camera, he tried everything he could do, and failed repeatedly. And then he went, with the help of his uncle Robert, Elias's younger brother, who lived in Hollywood. He just dedicated his house, by the way, in Kingswell. And my cousin Joanne restored it. Set up the garage as an animation studio, essentially. And he created products like the Alice comics. But then Hollywood is an unscrupulous business, and he lost everything. He lost his artists, he lost the rights to Oswald, for instance, which we finally got back. Anybody got Oswald? But every night he would go to his brother Roy had done World War I and gotten tuberculosis through the war, and was convalescing at that point in the Santa Monica Hospital. And he would go to Roy every night. And Roy, remember, is 8 years older than Walt, and would would tell Roy the story of, how he lost, and his brother was a no-nonsense banker from Kansas City. And I mean no nonsense. And the reality was that Roy finally checked himself out of the hospital against his brother's advice, or his doctor's advice. And the two of them went into business as the Disney Brothers. And I've done this in 1923.
You know what? Our theme this year is around the world. And Roy, after company with Roy, with Walt, he took a lot of really interesting business moves and went all over the world and built an empire of Disney consumer products and publishing and all kinds of amazing things, as well as running the finances and the business of the studio. Can you tell us a little bit about, some of the highlights of his career?
So, if you know, half the company is built on foreign business. And in those days, it was marketing and product that we were producing. And remember, we were first in the character marketing, so we also marketed that. But he would go to Europe every other year to meet the distributors in every country. He knew their families, he knew their kids' birthdays. And every other year, he would fly them to his house, which is the house I now live in, and entertain the families. That's what I grew up with as a kid. And so he built the company until World War II on that. And then, of course, in World War II got away, so he had to start all over again. But just to give you an idea, one of the famous trips he did in 1946, he flew to London to meet P.L. Travers in London to start negotiating Mary Poppins, which is crazy to think that it was in production in 1964 and we still didn't have a contract. But
he was a great man.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying that he wasn't a good negotiator. But yeah, he traveled the world, and my dad, who had access to cameras at 3 years old, photographed a great deal of it. So I'm lucky to have some of his photos.
You're great. Now let's get to you. And you can tell me what's some of your earliest Disney memories?
Okay, well, first of all, that's anatomy.
Oh, darn.
And secondly, I will tell you that my dad had access to every toy we ever made and broke them all. So he and I have never quite worked that out, but
that's your grandfather holding the hand of your father.
Yeah, I think that's Lyric Avenue, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And it's really remarkable that we have all this stuff. I still have some of this stuff, but not a whole lot.
Well, your father grew up and took you and your siblings to Disneyland. Now you have your brother and two sisters, correct?
Correct. We're all a year apart. We used to call that Irish twins, or
I don't
know if I can say that. I don't know how much my mother would say about that. But anyway, this photo of my dad and my younger sister and younger brother is probably one of my favorite Disney moments of all time, just because it is the classical family Disney moment. That was my mother in the Dumbo, my grandmother in the Dumbo ride. She was fearless. She was the first person to sit on Space Mountain at 80 years old. She was the first person to sit on the People Mover on the Rocket Rocks ride, if you remember that. There's my grandmother on the left-hand side of the bench. The Matterhorn at Disneyland, they don't do that anymore. And this is my aunt, who was a tour guide. And that's the outfit they made her wear. If anybody's seen these.
Here's another great shot of you with your grandparents.
Yes, and by the way, this is how I had to dress. Because we had to represent. And I have a great story about that. When we were kids, back in the day, my parents let us just free range the park. And they said, I want you back at City Hall at 12:30. And if you can't make it to City Hall, ask a security guard, and they will help you. So I did one day, just to find out how that worked. I'm not saying I didn't know how to get to City Hall, but I am saying I thought it was cool to talk to a security guard. And the first thing he said to me is, "What's your name?" And I, of course, said Disney. And he, of course, said, "Oh, yeah."
And then you said Roy Disney, and that made it even worse, huh?
Yeah, okay.
So, speaking of Disneyland, I have a question. Did you ever spend time with Walt at Disneyland? Who was your great uncle?
So, I spent more time in Walt's other office when we would go visit my grandfather. My grandfather was an accountant, essentially. So, or an outer office. But Walt had the outer office that wouldn't quit. It had every Academy Award, it had all new toys in it, and we would sit out in that outer office for hours. But Walt was a workaholic. He slept 2 hours a night. He never stopped. Never stopped. But I do have one special moment that I can remember so clearly. When I was probably about 7 years old, we used to have a ride at the park, and that's not a ride, it's a show. A guy on the jetpack. It was sponsored by Bell Helicopter, Bell Disney Helicopter,
Let's turn that sound out of your mind. Go ahead and speak over this.
Yeah, so this was the loudest, silkiest ride we ever did. As you can see. But Walt picked me out of the crowd that day, and he had 2 chairs set up on top of this little 1-story control tower that they had around that little circle. And he put the chairs up there, and he and I sat up there and watched this event. And king of the world. I felt like the most important person on earth, and he had a way of doing that to every single child he ever ran into at that park. God bless him.
Oh, that's wonderful. That must have been so exciting. That's just wonderful.
See, he knows the more.
Well, now here we have another wonderful, momentous event at the park that you got to witness, and that was the opening of Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World in 1971. You were there.
October 23rd, 1971. Was anybody there?
Was
wow, congratulations.
That's great.
Because I'm only 39, so. Yeah, you know, swampland in Florida, and I grew up, in my childhood, we drove from California to Key West, and one of my dad's jobs was to reconnoiter the state of Florida in 1966, 67, just to see what the entertainment industry in the state looked like. And it was alligator farms, bush gardens, cypress gardens, and that was it. And some cats at the Hemingway house. But in any event, when we drove up to this park in the week before it opened, every tree that you see on the property was still in a box. They had not even planted the trees. The rooms of the Contemporary were still being plugged in by cranes. And you asked, why didn't we get it perfect before we opened it? And I thought to myself, they kind of had a momentum. And it kind of had to open. So, and that said, if you see the picture of my grandfather, who never gave a public speech, standing next to Mickey and Lily and my grandmother, they had, Meredith Wilson conducted a 1,076-piece marching band that we were standing on the top of the train station. They came out from underneath us, they went around the Main Street Circle, and they went up, I think 6th wide, and they went up Main Street and up to the castle, and at that point they were still coming out from underneath the train station. It's one of the most profound moments in my life.
There's nothing better than a big marching band. That's wonderful. Now, I want to move on a little bit now and start talking a little bit about your father, who was Roy Edward Disney. Roy was also there, of course, at the opening of Walt Disney World, and you got to spend some time with him there, didn't you? Do you have any fun memories of that?
Yeah, we were there probably anywhere between 6 and 8 times a year for the first couple of years. And it was a playland, for sure. If you see there are hubcaps, which are catamarans, and then of course I got to sail these around too when they rented sailboats back in the day, but they've stopped that, probably because of me. But in any event, my father and I used to get the Hobie Cat up on one hull, and we would sail by the ferry boats going to the park. And those drivers hated us.
But they couldn't say a word, could they?
I can't say one way or the other, but there are no more sailboats.
Well, there are some other sailboats, though, in your family history. I got a shot here of a very special one.
Yeah, this is a movie that my father and I did called Morning Light, which is still on iTunes, I think. Youngest crew ever to sail to Hawaii. He trained them for 2 years. Two of these kids, that I still call them kids, they're not anymore, eventually competed in the round the world race and won it the last time. Charlie Enright and Ron Tower. And this was a project that I was a personal trainer on, as well as a sailmaster for these kids for 2 years.
Great.
Terrible, sucky job, but I did.
Well, there's also another famous boat in your family history, and I found something recently that I thought was really hilarious. If any of you been to the yacht club, stayed at the yacht club in Walt Disney World Resort? Well, they used to have these wonderful shower curtains in the rooms.
Wait, that's my shower curtain.
Exactly. If you look at it really closely there, you'll see a ship that has the name Pyewacket on it. And Pyewacket was Roy's other boat. You want to tell us a little bit about Pyewacket?
So Pyewacket is a boat that my dad and I have been sailing together since 87. And before that, the boats were all called Shamrock. For my mother, I imagine. But her maiden name was Daly, so quite Irish. But in any event, so there have been a lot of Pyewackets. Pyewacket, the name itself, is, well, frankly, it's a crossword puzzle word, but it means magical cat. Or in Druid, it means male witch. And it's a cute name. It's not an evil name, but for those of you into Villain's Land, I don't know. Could be there.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your father's huge impact on the history of the Walt Disney Company. He was integral. He traveled a lot, just like his father Roy did. But let's go back a little bit further and tell us a little bit more about Roy and the family. And I love this picture there of Lillian with his parents.
Lily, and this is the press opening night, June 17th, 1955, where my mother is showing off her massive, giant, quarter-carat diamond ring. And that's Lily at the Golden Horseshoe Review congratulating the both of them for getting engaged. Now, I wasn't born for 2 years after that, so I have questions. But anyway, this is the wedding day, and there's Walt, or there's my grandfather and Edna, and my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, the happy, young, naive couple.
Well, then after that, they ended up getting married, and they went to Switzerland.
They went to Geneva. Walt had just done Roy had just done a TV show called Perry for Disney Sunday Movie. Perry was about squirrels. You know how squirrels talk. Everybody's aware that animals talk, right? And so Walt had tasked my father with writing the book to go with the TV show. And my dad proceeded to get pneumonia, so. But they spent quite a bit of time, I think almost a year in Geneva.
Well, this is really funny. We are going to be doing a show shortly about Down the Rabbit Hole, which is about all the things we find in the archives when we're not really looking for them. And just the other day, I wasn't even prepping for this presentation, but I came across something when I was looking for something entirely different. And it was in the Mickey Mouse Club magazine, which came out in 1956. And there's a story in there about Switzerland written by Pat and Roy E. Disney. I had never shown that to you, did I? Isn't that fun?
I need to read this.
They told their whole story, and all the photos that they took for the article were shot on their honeymoon. So I thought that was adorable.
Remember I told you my dad had cameras and he shot all those photos in there.
Now here's a lovely picture. You're still dressing up for all of your adventures.
Does anybody remember flying like this? This is how we used to have to fly all the time. Not anymore. People do their nails, people do all sorts of things. Now that's Pan Am Airways in the background at LAX. I think we were on our way to Washington, D.C. Walt got the Medal of Arts Award from Richard Nixon. And so we were traveling to D.C. My mother in her Chanel outfit.
That's great. And what's the other photo of you with?
The other one, my dad was a pilot when he was 16 years old, which is quite an accomplishment. And one of his flight instructors was one of the 9 old men named Willie Ryder. You might remember him.
Directed the Jungle Book. So let's move on now to your father is so famous for his contribution to saving animation in Disney, and we've been celebrating so many of the films that came out during his time overseeing the animation division. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so can anybody keep a secret in this room? Anyone? Because I see all the cameras up. So when we ended up replacing management in 1984, the first item on the business plan was to eliminate animation. And we had just made 2 films, The Black Cauldron and The Black Hole. Now, if that's a direction that we were going, and my dad said, no, time out. You let me take care of animation. And so my father was personally directly responsible for the renaissance of Disney animation.
Boy, are we happy about that. So you worked at the company for about 15 years yourself, right?
Correct. I worked first at the Disney Channel, film and television post-productions, and then for a while as an Imagineer.
And in that time, you worked with your dad on one really great project, right?
Yes. So in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a thing called Japan Inc., and we all thought Japan they were buying everything, and their economy was booming. But it occurred to me that 98% of everything they have, they import, and they have nowhere to put it. And it occurred to me that if we could somehow be sustainable and manage our environment and still make a profit, we would have a product that we could sell to them. So that was the genesis of the idea. So I went to my dad and I said, what if we had an environmental policy? And he said, okay, I like the idea, but if you could sell this to Frank Wells, who was the CEO of the company, or the COO of the company, then we'll talk about it. And Frank was a Harvard-educated lawyer who climbed 6 of the 7 summits and one of the smartest, most intimidating men I've ever met, a super guy. Basically, it was 3 hours of me saying, why not? And he would say, why? But it's a stand-off, and we have environmentality today that I help right now.
And I'm really very, very grateful for you. Absolutely. We have about a minute left, and so I wanted to just ask you one final question. This is a lovely montage here of all 3 of the Roy Disneys that have worked at Disney. And just want to see, what is your, what philosophy would you take?
Well, first of all, it's a trick question.
Oh, there's well,
There's actually more than 3 Roys. I have a son named Roy Michael, but I think we're done with the Roys. We had a dog named Roy. Dinner was very good. It's a very old school name, but it's fine. It's easy to spell.
It is.
So the question was, what philosophies did I learn growing up that I think can still apply today, or valuable today, that the company should keep in mind? And let me say that, first of all, I believe those philosophies are deeply imbued in the company now already. But that said, it starts with telling a quality story. That's the most important enduring thing you have, because those things endure. Snow White was a ride that we still stand in line for, and that's 1932. What are the odds? So telling the strong story, having strong connection musically. God bless Joey Benson, for instance. God bless Howard Ashman. And all the Broadway writers and singers that you just saw, villains, those are amazing people.
Absolutely.
But stay with quality. Do the right thing.
Very good. One little thing that I wanted to leave you with, this is a really sweet little edited piece that we want to share that features your grandfather, Roy O. Disney, and the founding of the Walt Disney Company and the founding of Walt Disney World. So we're going to leave you with that, but before we go, big round of applause and thanks for
is a tribute to the philosophy and the life of Walter Elias Disney, and to the talent, the dedication, and the loyalty of the entire Disney organization that made Walt Disney's dream come true. May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place. A magic kingdom where the young at heart